welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here, we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Xanthe, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you on. I've been wanting to have you on for so long, so it's just truly an honor and a thrill.
Oh my gosh, it is a thrill. I feel like my energy feels so like, I don't know, like intense. I'm like excited about this. I feel like I've been looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Mm. Well, so Xanthe and I have been working together very closely for, I feel like almost a year.
I think it's like 9 months, maybe a
Which
little
is,
bit more because of like a holiday break. So yeah, probably about a year.
yeah, which is so crazy. I always call you my business mentor, but that's not the language that you use when describing yourself. So I'm curious if that feels true for you or if that's just the shape our dynamic took on.
That's such a good question. And I do feel like I'm quite interested in the idea of titles and like the way that we hold on to them, sometimes really tightly, sometimes loosely, sometimes with like a bit of resistance. And I like business mentor. Like, I don't call myself that because I feel like, in a way, I don't know why, but for some reason, like the language of mentor, it's almost like I feel like someone has to make that choice for themselves, like how they see the dynamic and how they see the relationship. But I really like it. And I think it's very accurate. I go by online leadership strategist because that's truly my area of expertise. And at the same time, I think the actual like relationship that I have to people I work with can shift and be very dependent on like how they receive support or how they prefer to receive support. So sometimes I'm like very in the strategy tactical, and sometimes I'm more in the like coaching, supporting, guiding, and sometimes I'm more in the mentorship where I kind of consider that like, I'm leading through past experiences and kind of like helping you to navigate whatever you're going through from maybe a few experiences ahead. I don't really like to use that word because I feel like we're always like in tandem with each other anyways, but yeah, just using insights to guide. So I'd say that's accurate, but it definitely is like my area of expertise is more so in the marketing strategy space and the online space.
Yeah. And okay, there's so much just in that I want to get into, but I first want to start with the first question that I ask everyone, which is, what is something you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do?
Oh my gosh, I feel like this is ever changing. I feel like what's really present for me right now as you ask that question is definitely like the uncurated, sillier, kind of like crass version of myself that is to me so much a part of my identity. Like if you hang out with me in person, like I'm gonna be swearing. I'm gonna be saying something that's like a little bit like offside, Like I feel like there's so much that is very unpolished about the way that I present and like live and speak and just like engage with people in the world. I'm silly and I'm kind of random. And I think that's something where it's hard to translate that online because we have to, in some way, like curate. And even though that might not be intentional in the sense that we're not trying to hide anything, it's just because there is that little degree of foresight and there's that little bit of even just having, I would consider myself to be aesthetic forward. I like beautiful things. I'm good at creating beautiful things. I'm good at creating beautiful visuals. And so what you see does often come off as very polished or put together. And that's my artistic expression, but it's not necessarily my personality. So I do feel like that's something where I notice a lot of tension, or tension maybe isn't the right word, but like I would love for people to be able to experience that 360 more. And I'm always looking for ways to express it. So that's what comes up for me right now.
That's so interesting. I do feel like it comes through for me, maybe because we've been working so closely together, but I think also it comes through more in your podcast. Like since you've started your
Yeah.
podcast with Frank, I feel like more of your personality has been able to come through in that way. And that's the reason why I love podcasts because they're more elongated, especially the kind of conversations that you and Frank have on your podcast because you talk about so many different things, but your personalities are really able to show through. You're not like focused on one specific topic or it has to always be like serious or in a certain realm. So I know that that was intentional. And one thing that I really admire about you is that you really are a leader in the sense that you realize something that you want and you go do it. And you're not looking around to like find someone else who's doing it first or like figure out the right strategy to do it. Like you figure that out for yourself and then you help other people if that feels aligned. But I'm curious if you always had that. I don't know if it's confidence or just like this action oriented way of handling the world. Like, I'm curious how that's developed for you.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for reflecting that. I really appreciate that. I feel very seen in that. And I would say, have I always been like that? No, like in a way, I think that I have always followed what I desired to do. It's been very difficult for me to exist in a world that like felt in any way constricting or unsatisfying to me. But obviously, like as you grow up, you don't have as much control over how your life looks or what you're allowed to do or what you have access to. And I definitely found that I was much more of like a peacekeeper when I was, especially like in my friendship dynamics, when I was in my maybe late teens, early 20s, a lot of people pleasing tendencies, a lot of not wanting to upset people. And in some ways, like I would hide a lot of stuff from people and I wouldn't always like want to be telling my truth or like sharing that I felt a certain way or that I wanted a certain thing because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings or I didn't want to get in trouble, those kinds of complexes. And I definitely feel like that leading without asking permission or leading without feeling like I needed to like, and I think in a way, like looking for proof or looking for evidence that someone else has done what you have done is a form of asking for permission. Like it is a form of being like, is this okay? Am I going to be okay? Like, is it safe for me to do this? And I think as I started to dissolve some of those not so awesome traits of feeling like I was constantly looking for other people's approval, I then started being able to just like actually listen to myself. So like that wanting and that yearning always was there. It was just that I wasn't necessarily as apt at asking, I guess, or acting on it until I had a little bit more space from some of those relationships where that dynamic was being upheld.
Mm. And how do you feel like you made the shift from people pleasing to not seeking permission and just doing the thing? Was there a realization? Was there a moment? What did that look like for you?
I think it's like in a sense, I think it's practice. I also think like I will say I have certain memories of almost being like the tea kettle that like boiled up and like exploded. That was like the moment where it was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I sometimes would like get very reactive and have really difficult fights with people, or, it would almost be like the straw that broke the camel's back where all of a sudden I would say something really nasty to somebody, which is like, whoa, tell me how you really feel. But it was like bottling up inside me for like a long time. And so sometimes it would just be a matter of those things coming to a head and me not being able to hide them anymore and then being forced to face my decisions, my impulsivity, whatever that looked like. But then interestingly enough, although maybe that isn't the way that I wanted to go about it or the way that I would have chosen or even would like recommend that you go about it, it did create that evidence for me that like, oh, I actually can say what I feel. And yeah, maybe if I say it like an asshole, people are going to be upset and I'm going to have to deal with that. But ultimately I'm going to survive and actually I'm going to feel a lot happier. And I started to realize like, wait, every time this happens, I create space. So what would it look like to do this in a way that's a bit more proactive where I can actually like articulate my needs before it gets to that point so that I can then continue to create this space that now I know feels good, even if I like kind of came to it in a way that wasn't ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did people respond to that? Like, do you still have people in your life now who knew you in a past time? And do you feel like they're surprised by the way you show up in the world now, or is that, have they just seen the trajectory and so it makes sense?
I think that's really interesting. That's such an interesting question. So my friendship dynamic has been super unique in the sense that like I grew up in a like pretty big city, but with a very like small community within that city, just in the sense that like we all went to a high school based on where we lived, right? So we kind of like knew each other by proximity. But even more so, I went to school in French immersion. So I had a really small class. And so everyone that I was friends with from when I was like 3 years old all the way till I graduated high school were basically the same like 20 kids.
Mm.
And so we stayed really close, almost like to a fault. Like we were like family, like we would spend summers. Like I remember I could count on like one hand the nights that I spent at home in like 2 months. We were always like so interconnected and codependent in a lot of ways. But at the same time, like it was really beautiful. Like it was very family. It was like a very family feeling dynamic. And I think actually because of that, they were able to be friendships that evolved really well together in the sense that we all kind of grew up in such an intimate way in the same way that I think you can with like your siblings or your parents, where it's like, I do feel like a lot of my friends that I have now are still from that time. Like my best friends are still people who have known me since I'm 3 years old. And because of that, it's almost like they were like waiting for me to claim what they already knew was meant for me. It's like almost feels like in a way like, yes, we definitely had like contention and there was a lot of fights and there was a lot of like, drama. But at the same time, we always kind of came back to each other because like they want the best for me and they saw the best for me even when I maybe couldn't see that. So I have a few friends like I'm just thinking of now who I know like for a fact, like they'll send me a message. I actually had a really beautiful, this is just like kind of a side note, but it's like really beautiful timing. I have a friend who I have known like since I was really, really young. We were neighbors growing up, but we actually didn't go to the same school, but our moms were best friends. So we like spent a ton of time together growing up. And eventually she moved away. I moved away. She's gone kind of like different path with her life. Like, and I've gone, doing whatever the fuck I'm doing. And we haven't really been in touch that much. And it's always been one of those things where I kind of feel like that's too bad. Like I love her so much. We were so close. Like we were the type of friends where like you connect after a year and it's like no time has passed. And I still feel that we would be that, but we just haven't really kept in touch after I moved away. And so, other than, Instagram likes and things like that. And so she just sent me a message like yesterday, literally. And she was like, I just want you to know, I'm so glad that you started a podcast. I listened to every episode. It makes me feel like we're still keeping up and I feel so close to you. And she's like, I'm so happy that this is your life. And I was just like one of those moments where, oh my God, I'm getting teary up. But it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, like you see me in that, like, this is what I've always wanted. And it's so beautiful to feel like even though it maybe means that we aren't as close, that you like accept that and celebrate that with me. So that's just like a cute example.
That's such a cute example. And I can think of so many friends from my childhood who, if they sent me that message, like it would mean the world to me. And at the same time, it would also make me a little sad of like, okay, you're getting this side of me, like you're feeling like we're in connection, but I don't feel like we're in connection. So how do you handle that when so many of your relationships are online?
It is a super interesting dynamic. And it's funny because my immediate message to her was like, I wish you had a podcast, which like she's not online at all. So it is really funny because I do think in a certain way, it's something I have to be very conscious of where I know that sometimes my friends don't feel like they have to ask me how I'm doing because they know, but I have to ask them because I don't know. And so I'm very conscious of like who are the people wherein like I don't need to necessarily feel, and I don't like I'm not really the type of person who's like keeping score to begin with of like have you reached out to me or how often have you reached out to me? But I know that like I'm doing the lift. Like I'm going to be the one who says like, hey, how are you? Let's have a conversation because I'm constantly sharing and outputting and they're able to receive that in all these different mediums. And as much as like, of course, there's going to be things I don't share online. Like it's not that much. Like I really do share a lot. And so there's not that much like tea that's happening behind the scenes. And so I just have to be really conscious of like, who are the friends that I do and can keep up with just in this kind of like parasocial way until we have the time and capacity to hang out, or who do I need to be more conscious of like reaching out to on a consistent basis. And so I send a lot of voice notes. That's my main mode of communication to my friends from afar.
I'm such a voice note person. I wanted to go back to what we were talking about before about how emotions would build up and then you would just have to take the action. How do you know now when to take action before that happens? I've been thinking a lot about like when to stay with something and when to sit with it, and whether that's a relationship or a project you're working on, and when to pivot, when to change, when to do something different. And so I'm curious what that process is like for you.
Yes. And I think like you and I are a bit different in this way, which is something that we've noticed in working together too. But for me, it's like the minute that I start getting that nudge of this isn't it, like it's not it. Like I don't have to wait. Like I don't have to wait to find out. I don't have to wait for more evidence. I'm just like, it's not it. Like, and if I know and I don't pursue it, that's when that tension starts building up. So there's been a lot of situations where it's like, I could have called this 6 months ago and I didn't, but I could have, like, I felt it then and I waited. And it's always when I wait that it becomes like so much resentment builds up. And I almost get to that point where I'm like, holy fuck, I cannot stand this anymore. Rather than just being like, okay, I'm feeling the nudge. Let me slowly. And what I like to do, like if I start to feel that nudge where it's like, okay, this isn't working, I start asking myself questions, right? I start asking myself questions of like, what is the next step? Because if something's not working or it's not feeling right, I don't necessarily have to just like burn it down, bail. I could change something about it. And sometimes if I can catch it that soon, where it just starts to feel like that little tinge of resistance, then I can make tweaks to it so that I don't have to get rid of it entirely. But if I wait, the resentment is going to be way too intense to the point that like I'm not going to want to touch that thing. So like I'm thinking about it like let's say it's like an offer in my business or something like that. And if I was to notice like one day, like I'm really starting to feel like this is a little bit constricting, or I don't really like the dynamic that's playing out here, or I'm feeling uncertain, or whatever it might be, my first step would be like, can I change anything right now to solve that problem? And if the answer is yes, I'll just change it. And I'll just like move in those sort of like smaller, like micro decisions until I can feel like, okay, I feel really good in this now. But if I was to not do that and I was to ignore it and I was going to be like, I'm just going to muscle through, then 6 months later, I'd be like, I hate this. I'm never doing this again. Like it would like kind of like, what's the word? It like spoils the bunch or whatever. Like
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
like a poison. So I have to be like, no, 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 we got to ditch this now. Like I can't go back to it's never, I'm never going to be able to like tweak it from where it's kind of spiraled to, essentially.
Yeah, and I think this is something we've talked about how, like, if you are feeling like something's wrong or you're feeling that tension build up, it doesn't always mean that it's the whole thing that's wrong. Like, it could just be shifting one part of the project or changing one thing. And so, sitting with it and talking through it and figuring out what part of this doesn't feel right to me is really helpful.
Exactly. And it's super interesting because a lot of times it has nothing to do. This is like one of my overarching like principles that I try to think about a lot, which is like it's usually not the thing, it's the circumstance around the thing. So for example, I used to think I hated being on Zoom calls, but I didn't. I just hated being on five in a row, you know? So it's like the circumstance, or I hated doing them first thing in the morning, or like whatever it might have been, right? And the interesting thing is that that changes. Like I've gone through seasons where I love doing calls first thing in the morning, and I've gone through seasons where like having one-on-one conversations is all I'm craving. And then other seasons where like I'd rather be doing more group stuff. It's just sort of being very attuned to that again, it's being attuned to the nudges so that you can kind of sway and ebb and flow and not be feeling like so trapped in everything, which allows you to, I think, just mold your experience to always be feeling better,
Mhm.
essentially.
And it requires you to be so present with yourself and to know and accept that you are going to change and to make that okay, you know? And I think
Yeah.
that speaks to also the freedom of being an entrepreneur, having your own business because you do have more space. I guess it depends what your business is, but you do have more space to change your offers and do things differently. But I think all of us, no matter what our life is like, have the ability to be present with ourselves and be like, okay, what part of my life isn't working and how can I shift that for this season of life I'm in versus saying like, no, this is what I do and I stick to this no matter what. Because we are always changing, we are always evolving, and it's okay to be seen changing. And I think that that's something you're really good at. You're really good at coming up with new offers and sharing them and pivoting and sharing that process. And it seems so natural for you now. And I'm curious if it always felt that natural to like share your in the moment processing and evolution.
I think like yes and no. Like I think it's interesting because I think in a way a lot of that like people pleasing stuff that I mentioned that was more so around like friendships when I was younger. I do feel like that started to pop up again in business, especially when I was doing like a lot of service-based work. So when I was working, because I now am like fully in the marketing, consulting, coaching, strategy space, education space, but I was running a full-time like creative agency for a long time before that. And so we had a lot of like active clients, like clients we were working with for long periods of time. And it was one of those types, how should I say this? The dynamic of that work is that sometimes you can't just like bail when you feel like it's not going well. And I shouldn't say you can't, you always can, but it wasn't going to be the most like diplomatic choice. It wasn't going to be the best choice for the relationship. It wasn't going to be the best choice for our reputation. It wasn't going to be the best choice for our bottom line revenue. And we had a team. There was just so much more riding on the decisions. Whereas now I feel like every decision I make, I impact me. And yes, of course, I impact my client communities, but I know that when I make a decision, it's always for the better of both of us. Like if I need to walk away from something, it's for both of our benefit. It would be more harmful to stay. Like if I'm ever making the choice to put something down, it's because it is for the sort of like collective good as well as my own good, which in my opinion is in reference to that, right? Like if we feel really lit up and excited to be in the containers that we're in and in the spaces that we lead, then that benefits everyone. But if we don't, it has the opposite effect. But when I was working in dynamics at play were just different. Like it wasn't just my energy, it was like a whole team that we needed to kind of be thinking about. So in that sense, I feel like it was more challenging to share from the front of it all, to kind of share from exactly where I was at, because I knew that a lot of people might have questions and I was responsible for people's livelihoods, where it's like now if I share something and I make a decision about how I want to lead my business, I can articulate that without causing any alarm to anybody. But I feel like before there was just a lot of steps I would have to take. So here's an example. Now my decision making process, from me saying like, okay, I'd like to change something, to I'm going to communicate how I'm going to change that thing, there's no middleman, right? I think it I process it, I share it. But previously, I would have to think it, process it, share it with the team, let them process it, and then perhaps talk to clients, let them process it, and then it's public. So I think there is something to be said around when we talk about sharing and showing up and really like letting our evolution be kind of like out there for people to see. I do still think there are steps and like there is almost a like a system of courtesy perhaps wherein there are other people who may need to hear that or know about that before we put it publicly. And I would say that now I'm in a place where like that the number of people is much less, but that doesn't mean that that's still not a thing. Like there are actually a lot of things that Frank and I, even like on our podcast where we are like definitely our most like raw and real time, like we've had to wait to talk about them because there were other conversations that had to be had privately in order for us to feel comfortable speaking about that thing. And that might mean between us, it might mean between us and somebody else, it might mean between me and a client, like all of those things. So that was a long-winded answer, but I think just knowing like, yeah, who do you who do you owe an explanation to? I think that's actually like an interesting way to think about it.
Mm. And this also speaks to a quote or mantra, I don't know, that has been coming up a lot in my head recently as I've been kind of like reassessing it, which is speak from the scar and not the wound. And I know that we were talking more about like not more vulnerable things necessarily, but I would really love to know when you know when to share something and how that quote feels for you.
Yeah, I love it. I reference that in my programs and stuff too. But I do think in a way there is almost a misconception or like a misadaptation of that, which is to say that like we have to be fully healed because that is maybe never like not to be
Mhm.
pessimistic, but sometimes the wound gets opened again. And sometimes, you know, it's this kind of like ever evolving process. So the way that I think about it is it's not so much like, is the door closed on this thing and I feel complete in my experience with it. So now I can talk about it. It's more so like, am I in a place where I feel safe to open the door? I feel like there is an opportunity to check in with ourselves and more so look at, do I feel safe to open this conversation today? And knowing that, like, whenever we start a dialogue around something that may or may not be fully processed or fully healed. I think there's a big difference between something being like a complete story where we feel like, okay, I'm good, the door is closed, I can completely speak to this without ever getting activated by it again. I feel like that's honestly kind of unrealistic. There are so many things that like I could have spoken about at a certain time, maybe last year, and felt super calm and confident in that. And then maybe something happens later that activates that again. And I'm like, I'm not going to talk about that right now. That conversation's back off the table. So it's kind of being able to weigh where we're at in the moment and say, how do I feel about putting this out there? Because when we put something out into the world, we are going to elicit a response. And it's more about how prepared am I for the response than it is about like how I feel about putting this thing out into the world in the first place. So let's say that you yourself went through a really traumatic event and you want to talk about that thing. I don't believe that there's anything that's off limits where you can't speak about this thing or that's too much or that's too hard or any of that. The way that I would look at it is if somebody was to see that and then come to you and start giving you their pain on that same topic, can you hold that? Are you prepared for that? Because when we put something out into the public, that's what we're doing. We're inviting other people to be seen in our story. We're inviting people to maybe be seen in our pain, and they may feel like, I can now give you that. And I notice it a lot when people post about something difficult, like grief they're going through or something like that. Comments are all like, I went through this too. I went through this too. Can you hold that? Do you want that? And then I think that's the other piece of knowing that when we're sharing, it's the reaction that we need to be most conscious of in, can we hold what other people might have to say about it, which could be positive, could be negative, could be solidarity, whatever.
What was coming up for me, how I feel about the response, that like shifted something in my head. It's like, if, yes, can I hold what people bring, but also is their response going to shift something about myself? Like, am I still in such a vulnerable place that what they say is going to impact where I'm at in my healing? Even if it's something like sharing about an exciting work project that I want to do, but there's still like so much that needs to happen before it can come to fruition. If I share about it now and people are like discouraging it or saying negative things, is that going to impact me? And I think thinking about
Ooh.
that is really helpful too.
No, I love that. And so that's the other thing, right? It's like you might be opening up the door for other people's opinions. And if you don't feel super grounded in your choice, those opinions could sway your decision making. Yes. And especially when we are showing up in process. I actually joke about this a lot because I share a lot of behind the scenes of like our homes that we're renovating and stuff. And I'm like, I'll never ask you whether I should buy this table or that table because I already have decided. Like I'm not gonna pretend that I want your perspective because like I have already decided. there's certain things like that where it's like I can show you it in process, but I'm not going to say, hey, do you think I should do this or this? Like that's just not my style. That's not something that I'm really not a big fan of. I'm a big fan of like incorporating people into a conversation, but I think there's a difference between conversation and crowdsourcing. And I do try not to open myself up to any like crowdsourcing if I don't already feel like rooted or landed in my decision making, right? And about the response. So it's like if you are creating something or you're sharing something that's difficult, you also need to be really clear of are you creating it because you want a specific kind of response? And is it going to support you in a certain way, or do you think it's going to support you in a certain way? Because I think that can be very dangerous. So if you create something thinking like, well, I'm putting this out there because I need people to pity me, or I need people to see that I'm in pain, or I need people to say they're sorry, you might not get that. And that's probably putting you in a position that's just like not safe for you to be in from an online communication perspective, because you're putting so much weight on like how it's received versus thinking about the purpose of sharing it. We need to kind of get right with what that is without it being so deeply in relationship to what the response might mean or give us. So I want to put this out there. I want to share this because I want to give it to somebody else versus I'm putting this out there because I need something from them in order for me to feel better or to soothe myself throughout whatever the situation is. It could be something that's really challenging, like grief, or it could be something that's not as consequential, like what blinds should I get? But either way, you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position where you're receiving a lot of input from people and you want to be in a headspace to do that.
And I think that all of it speaks to being an actual leader online versus just like someone showing up online. And I think the problem is that there are people online not taking accountability and just sharing these things that can go viral or get a lot of traction from a place of seeking approval, from a place of wanting a certain response. And that is what can kind of turn a lot of the conversations online toxic versus someone showing up in integrity, very grounded and being intentional about why they're sharing and how that could impact other people. And then they're actually being a leader online.
And I think we all have different layers and levels to what feels right and how soon. Like, I always notice this when you start showing up on a new platform, like, and especially if it's a platform where of the moment content is really like important. So, like Substack notes or threads or even TikTok stories, things like that, where we feel like we have to share in the moment. And that can come through as very reactive. And so I also think there's this piece of like, what does it look like for you to process something? And how can you identify whether something is being shared through that lens of like reactivity or activation versus genuine just passion and excitement? And I do definitely share about things in the moment. Like, if something arrived at the door that I'm really fucking pumped about, like I might turn my camera on right away and film it. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to post it though. It's taking that extra layer of responsibility of saying, I want to make sure that whatever I create from this is something I feel proud about, something where I feel like I was in integrity. It's not about necessarily repackaging it, but have enough foresight to say, why am I putting this out there? Because I think sometimes we just get so excited about stuff and there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's so human. But it's exactly what you're saying is like when you're thinking about it through the lens of leadership, you are thinking about how you're impacting other people. And so you're thinking about like, how can I just create like a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of space between when I created this and where I put it so that I can use that little very minute gap, even if it's like a few minutes, to just like assess whether or not this is something that feels in service and something that feels in integrity and something that feels even just baseline fun and interesting and silly, and I want to put it out there, right? It doesn't have to be so serious. You can put something out there just for the sake of it, but I'd rather feel like that was my choice versus just like a knee jerk that then I end up feeling very dysregulated around it.
And I think that that's a practice that can compound over time. Like there might be certain things when you're first starting out, or even certain conversations that are new to you that you really want to practice that pause. But as you build that self-awareness and trust and comfortability around a certain situation, you don't always need to be so thoughtful about how you're processing it. And I think it just comes more and more naturally. So honestly, I think so much about showing up online in integrity points to self-awareness and self-accountability, which unfortunately not a lot of people online have. When you were speaking, you mentioned a furniture example of I'm not coming on like asking people. And that struck a chord for me because as you know, I'm building my space and I'm getting all the furniture and all the things. And there was a part of me that was like, I should document this process. Like, I love interior design and I am documenting it and I am figuring out how I want to share it, but I'm not doing it in real time. It has not felt good to like go into the space and record stories and then share them even like a day after or a week after. I'm still keeping it all close to the chest. And I am just allowing that to be the case for me. And part of that, I think, is because this is something that I want so badly and is so important to me. Which one thing I wanted to talk to you about very much was you created this new podcast with your friend Caitlin called Wanting in Public, which I love. I love that podcast too. You talk a lot about on that podcast and the other platforms, and again, are leading this about talking about what you want and just claiming it, putting it out there, even if you don't know that it's going to happen or how it's going to unfold. And I really want to talk about this because I think that we have been taught, especially as women in many different ways in society, to like not share our wants, to just not want in general, and to not be loud about it, to not have these big dreams and goals. And if it doesn't happen, that showing failure in public is something to be ashamed of. And so I would just really love to hear your thoughts about this.
You articulated it really well, where it's like this idea of desire as being something that needs to be quiet or needs to be hidden or is like uncouth or taboo or whatever. And I feel that what we really, really need to start doing more of, and which I'm actively aiming to do more of, is to be seen in the desire, knowing that the ultimate goal is not necessarily the acquisition. And if we actually reach that goal, cool. And if we don't, that's not a failure. I think that that's the biggest flip where it's like, I don't say that I want to reach this goal and I don't feel that if I don't reach it, I will have failed publicly. That is not the mindset that I'm holding around that. All I am seeing or experiencing through that is like, I'm setting this goal. You're going to be on the journey with me to this goal. Either I reach the goal or I don't reach the goal. If I don't reach it, I either reevaluate or I keep trying or I change course. And I don't feel afraid of that. So, this fear of changing your mind or changing course or just moving the goalpost or whatever that looks like, it's a complete reframe of whether or not that means that you've failed or whether that means that you've been wrong. And so, in this interesting way, we attach desire to failure because we think, well, if I want and can't get, I'm at a deficit. And the way I see it is like wanting is fucking fun. Like wanting is a joy and a pleasure just on its own. And striving can be fun and ambition can be fun. And like looking for new ways to achieve things can be really fun. And once you get something, it's actually kind of like, oh, okay. It's not that it's boring, but it's like it's satisfying and that's a beautiful thing. And you're just going to set a new goal anyway. We just live in this world in which like we are always wanting and striving and achieving. And we're in this like cyclical almost experience of that. And so I feel like it's very interesting to me how much weight we put on a singular experience or a singular experiment within that. And that's the way I like to see it. Is like it's an experiment. Like I'm gonna set a goal. I'm gonna say I want this thing. I'm gonna show you what it looks like to get it. I'm gonna let you know if I think that there was a misstep along the way that I could have done differently or would do differently next time. I'm gonna learn, you're gonna learn. And then we all get to start again. And that seems fun to me.
This is definitely something I've had to shift in myself and also really claim that I want things. I have deep desires, and I feel like part of my past history of like self-sabotage or restricting myself in some sort of way was trying to quiet and shut down those desires. And the more I re-engage with the world and through my healing, the desires have just built. And like, oh no, I have this energy within me and like I have to do it. And yes, I think the fear of failing and the fear of being seen failing has prevented so many people from going out and doing the thing. And your support has been so helpful for me in being like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to try. I'm just going to put myself out there. I'm just going to do the thing. And reframing failure of like, if this doesn't work out, it's going to lead to the next thing that is meant to happen. And this process was part of what I needed to get there. And also something I always say to myself is we want what we want for a reason. And you touched on this before of how like I really believe that our desires are inside of us uniquely for each individual for a reason, and we're meant to follow them. We wouldn't want what we want if we weren't meant to go out and try to get it. And for me, that's part of intuition, that's part of trusting ourselves. If we try to turn away from that, we're shutting off a part of ourselves.
Exactly. There's this idea of like the selfishness complex, right? The fear that wanting is to our own benefit, but maybe not the benefit of others, or we're putting our own needs above the needs of others, or for whatever reason, this idea of wanting as being like this very self-indulgent sort of energy. And what I think is so interesting is that I love the way that you speak to that, which is this idea that we want something for a reason and we might not want it for the sake of getting it. Like we might want it because we're meant to be on the journey to find it, or because of what we might find out through the process of striving for it, or through the process of sort of building towards it. And so I would think about it through the lens of, okay, I want this thing for a reason. This want is going to lead me to something, but it actually might not lead me to the finish line. It might not lead me to like achieving or getting this thing. But what I may find along the way is the value. That is what I'm meant to find. That is what I'm being led through or guided to find. And I mean, 99.99% of the time, I would actually say 100% of the time, even if you were to say, I want this thing, and you were to not talk about it at all and never share about it, and get to the goal and achieve the thing and arrive to the finish line, and then decide, okay, now I'm ready to share about it. What are you sharing about except for the journey, anyways? Like the journey is the value. And so, yes, maybe it feels better on your ego to say, I did all these things and it worked, and now I can teach what works. But if you did all those things and it didn't work, you can still teach that. You can still show that. You can still share that.
Also, it's so cool to know your human design because I feel like how you live your life is so aligned with that. I'm curious if knowing your human design has helped you in how you navigate your life. And alongside that, if you feel like there's this connection to your intuition that you use to navigate.
On the intuition part, I definitely feel like I have a deep connection to, it's almost that energetic body of like, how does this feel to me right now? Like, am I getting any signs that this is not feeling good or this is not the right fit? And it's interesting because obviously within the human design, there's a sacral, and it's like this idea of having this gut response. And I do feel like my gut instinct has always been something that I've paid a lot of mind to and physically feel like I'm very attuned to and can feel in any given moment. And so I think when I think about what is kind of guiding me, it feels like one thing or the other. It can either feel like that feeling of, oh, this feels scary in my gut and I don't like it and I want to get out of it. And not scary like, oh, I'm nervous, but scary in the sense of like, this is unsafe. I'm in the wrong place. I don't like this. Or it's like this fire where it's like, fuck, I want that. Like a deep desire, like super, super rooted. I would say that's how I would define my intuition is more so through this very sacral, it's either a yes or a no feeling. And when it's a yes, it's like a fuck yes. And when it's a no, it's like a definitely, I'm not doing that. And so through that lens, both my intuition is like honed through that. And I do spend a lot of time with myself in the sense of reflection and asking myself questions. And I know how to get the response that I need, right? Like it's almost like knowing how to navigate and how to arrive to that sacral kind of like yes, no feeling has been more of a practice. That's what I feel I've learned over time. Whereas it's like, it's kind of was already happening innately just because like life is a series of questions and a series of experiences that we can like respond to yes or no. But as I've learned more about my human design, I've noticed that if I do feel uncertain, I need to ask myself questions. I need to find myself in a situation where I'm able to almost like interrogate myself to see when that response comes, where the response comes, what that response is. And I've loved learning about my human design. I'm definitely not a human design expert, but I do feel like I know enough about my own. But at the same time, I've always seen it as a very affirming practice. I don't feel, which I'm sure you can kind of see in just saying that, is like I don't feel confused by it. Like I don't read it and think like, what, me? I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's me.
I know that when it comes to your business, you're very much able to follow your own intuition and take action because it's really just you in a lot of ways. But how do you navigate situations, say with Frank, like even deciding Xanthe's about to move to Spain, which is very exciting. Deciding that move, were you guys on the same page from the start, or what did that look like for you?
It's really funny. I think about this sometimes too, because I do feel like I'm definitely the instigator of change, but he's also super down to ride. He's a sacral too. So it's interesting because if it's a yes for him, it's a yes for him. If it's a yes for me, it's a yes for me. And sometimes we're not saying the same yeses, or we're not saying the same, you know what I mean? Like sometimes we don't agree, but that doesn't necessarily mean, I feel like whenever it's been like those bigger things, we've definitely been able to, I mean, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we weren't on the same page. Like, okay, here's an example. If it was like completely 100% up to me, I'd probably move to France. But Frank's not gonna do that. So we were like, okay, let's figure out like, and it wasn't even like a conversation. It was just like I kind of know in my bones like that's not an option. And I think actually, if it was completely up to him, we'd probably live on a beach in Mexico somewhere. But he knows that that's not 100% an option. So we're looking for like we both know what we desire. Like, we're very values led. We're very much like we want to create the life that is like the ideal life, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be in a specific place. And also, we're both very very open to like trying on different things. So in the sense of, moving around, like we have lived in Mexico, we've lived in LA, big city. That was me, like I definitely like pushed that dream forward. He definitely pushed the Mexico dream forward. We like tried things on, and there's been things that have worked and not worked for either one of us in all those places. And so we're always kind of in that state of like, let's see, let's explore, let's investigate. And so people ask, do you think you're going to live in Barcelona forever? I'm like, no, definitely not. Like I couldn't imagine us living in any one place forever. But is Europe very likely to be where we spend the rest of our life? Yeah, I do think so, because it does have so much of what we desire, and it gives us so much opportunity to actually both experience things independently, which is quite interesting too to even think about, right? Where it's like, we are two individuals. He wants to have his like quiet beach town. I want to be in a big city. So how can we be within proximity to that, where it's going to not be super expensive for us to access both those things? And I say expensive more so through the lens of like, is it going to be in alignment with our values financially to be doing that, right? Whereas like if we were jetting off like between like, I don't know, London and like Costa Rica, that wouldn't feel to us necessary based on the type of life that we want to live, Whereas like we'd like for it to be like I could jet off to the weekend to Paris, and then we could kind of hang out at the beach for the next weekend, like make it really easy and simple within our lifestyle. So we're just like thinking about that all the time, very much like through that values led lens. And I think it's easy for us to have conversations where like maybe the initial suggestion is like jarring to the other person, but we're able to kind of find that middle ground of like, okay, wait, like I see what you mean, like let's figure it out. And interestingly, like too, I think by way of even like as we're having this conversation, I'm at our cottage, right? And it's like for me to be able to have this property and be living in a place like this, like I wouldn't have thought of that. Like that would never have been on my bingo card. But Frank likes this lifestyle. He likes to have a little bit of that like more quiet. He likes like the manual labor. He likes like those types of things. And so by way of him like introducing me to that, I've now seen how this plays like a really important role in my story and in my kind of like location ecosystem. But I could probably be here for like 1 month of the year, and that's going to be good for me, whereas he might come for longer, and that's fine. Like we can also kind of be separate, which I think is important. So I kind of went down the like relationship rabbit hole. But I mean, I think when we talk about so many pivots and things like that, I think a lot of it really comes down to trust, and it comes down to being able to feel like there is that belief in both each other truly, in the sense that, let's say for example, I want to make a big change, and I've made a big change to like our offer ecosystem, which like could potentially remove like thousands of dollars from our recurring revenue each month. That's going to be really startling for Frank, because he doesn't bring in an income. He feels like pretty like there is a little bit of like a dynamic where it's like a lot of that is kind of like in my control where the money comes from, whereas he's just like moving it around and putting it in bank accounts. Like his relationship to the money in our life is very different than mine, and so he experiences it very differently than me. And so we do have to, and we've learned like how much lead time does he need? Like what conversations do we need to have? What maybe like securities do we need to have in place so that he feels safe with like what maybe for me, I'm like okay with moving really quickly, and I'm just like, oh, we'll figure it out. I'll trust it. You know what I mean? Whereas he's like, I don't know if I trust it in that same way. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't trust me, or that he doesn't believe that we can figure it out, or that he doesn't believe that we can like make it work if we have to make it work, because we always do. It's just a matter of being really conscious of like, what do you need to feel safe, and what do I need to feel free? Because I feel like those are the two tensions that we're always balancing. It's like Frank needs security, I need freedom. Where do they converge?
That's so interesting. And that's why it's so important to be so grounded in yourself when in a relationship, so that you can have the confidence to, well, first of all, know what you want, and then have the confidence to share it with the other, and then be able to receive what they want and navigate through that. And I always find it so fascinating, especially, I mean, looking specifically at human design, to like see the way that two charts kind of mesh together when your energies are together. And it really does, it creates one combined chart. Just seeing the way that when you come together with another person, it can change the trajectory of your life, and you kind of like build off of each other in a really beautiful way. And I know that a lot of the ways that you and Frank have structured your life is very unique and different. And one of those ways is that, I mean, I don't know if this is so crazy anymore, but you guys don't want kids. I'm curious if that's something that you always knew for yourself.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So okay, before me and Frank got together, I was engaged when I was like, I want to say, how old was I? Maybe like 24, um, young. And I was engaged for like maybe a year and a half, or not even. Like it wasn't a super long engagement. We ended up breaking it off. Obviously, we're not married. But I was with him for quite a while. But I was young. So like I think we met when I was like 21, and we were together till I was like 25 or something like that. The exact dates I'm not exactly sure, but I was young, early 20s. And at that point, I remember like we very much had a relationship where like he was from my same hometown, like our friends dated each other. Like it was just kind of like one of those relationships where it was like, yeah, like we'll get married, we'll have kids, we'll buy a house, like we'll just do that whole thing. And I kind of knew always, this is a really good example where it's like I knew deep down, like this is not the life I want. This is not what I saw for myself. I'm not like living up to the vision that I've had for myself. And I know that like I want to live in another city. I want to have something different. Like I just like had this like drive to be something different. And it's not to say that I have any issue with that. And like I have so many friends who are like so happy in that same dynamic. And I don't have any like distaste for that. It was just that like I felt very like suffocated, but like without the language to explain why I felt that way, or without the language to kind of understand like what it was that I was actually like battling against. But it was just kind of like, okay, like we'll just do this. And so I remember thinking like so distinctly, like we talked about having kids. I remember thinking about like just kind of assuming like eventually I will want them. Like right now, I don't want them. Right now, I don't want them. I'm 21 years old. Eventually, I'll want them. And so I remember just thinking that and being like, whatever, like it's what you do. So I'm sure it will hit me eventually. And then after we broke up, it was like one of those things where I was like, oh my God, I'm so fucking glad I didn't do that. I don't want that at all. All of a sudden now I'm 26 years old. All my friends are starting to have kids. And I'm like, that is so far from the life that I see for myself. And like how much I realized just how like it's I mean obviously it's like the hugest most like biggest like choice you can make in the world, and I think like when you see other people going through that you just realize like the actual like I don't want to say like weight of it because I don't think of it as like it's a heavy thing, but it's just like it's a very serious, it's completely life altering. No one would argue with that, obviously, right? And so I think as I started seeing other people's lives change and I started realizing like, whoa, like I'm at the age where I thought I would kind of have changed my mind, and it felt like I was going more the other direction, like more and more I was like I really don't want that, that really doesn't appeal to me, I really don't think I would be suited for that. The more I just started to like root in that as like, okay, I think this is what I want. And then when me and Frank got together, I was older, I was almost 30. That's when I was like, okay, like I'm doubling down, like I really do not want to have kids. And he was like, no, me either. And so he got a vasectomy and the rest is history.
Wow. Wow. And first of all, I love how you and Frank found each other and you both like we're just so aligned because I think that that can be hard to find sometimes. And I I think again it's tuning into your intuition and trusting yourself and not making yourself wrong or making your intuition wrong and talking yourself out of what your body's telling you. And even if for some reason like some version of you had decided eventually that you wanted kids, you were so clear in that moment that you didn't. And so just allowing that to be. And so I think that that self-trust and self-acceptance is so important.
Yeah, totally. And I think like I do believe also in like different paths with different people. Like I think in a sense, like had I for whatever reason stayed with my ex and we had had the life that I thought we were going to have, like do I think we could have had kids? Do I think that he would have been a great dad? Do I think I probably could have like figured it out and stepped into that role, and like maybe there was a whole other trajectory that was intended for me if I had stuck it out and done that? I mean, obviously that's also kind of like a weird way to look at it because like I didn't choose that and I never will, and it is what it is. But I do think in a certain sense like I also can really see that like Frank and I's partnership has amplified who I am as a person, as an individual. And the more I was able to see that, the more I was able to see clearly, like, is this role for me? Is this life for me? And that's when I was able to be like, mm-mm, definitely not. Like, I really don't feel that way. And I agree with what you're saying, where it's like, is there a perhaps another trajectory where in 10 years I look at it and I think like, maybe I could go for a kid right now. And I think knowing me, it's like there's always a way, there's always a way. Maybe it looks different, but I don't feel like any choice is like 100% forever and ever final. I do feel like I know 100% for certain that like the life I'm choosing and the path I'm pursuing does not include parenthood. And I feel like very good about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just have to be present with the version of us happening right now. And
Yeah.
I do think that when we're in the right partnership, it makes us more of ourselves. Like it
Yeah.
just like allows us to be more free and like more wild and more all of us versus making us feel more constricted or taking on more of like a codependent enmeshment type energy. Yes, well, you really a beautiful relationship does have that like interwoven aspect, but even more so, it just like allows you to be your full self.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think it is really interesting. Like, even as I was just saying that, like, it's funny because I think about it, it's like I do feel like in all the different like potential paths for me, I always see myself as very much like who I am as this sort of like independent pillar that kind of like moves around and like does the things that I want to do, lives a life that I want to live. And like Frank is an amazing support to that. And he is like at this point the love of my life. But I also feel like it's exactly what you said, where like I've never felt more capable on my own as I have in this relationship, which is like a really interesting dynamic to have and to notice, where it's like this man makes me feel more capable to be without him than anyone that I've ever been with before, which I think is such an interesting way to look at it.
That I love that so much, and that comes through absolutely. And I'm asking this question with the knowing that this is very layered, and I've been actually writing a lot about this recently. Because the question is, do you feel like you're in this transition moment in your life? And so I'm curious if you feel like you're in a particular season of your life, or if you would have like a title for this chapter that you're entering. But I'm saying that knowing that it's hard to see another season before you've even entered it, or, even when you're in it. And seasons have many chapters within them. But I'm curious if anything comes to mind for you in that question.
Yeah, so it's so funny. So it's really interesting. I've been asked, this is like the third time that that question has come up in the last week, which is super interesting. Like I was, it was like Maya who asked me on like because I'm going to be on her podcast, and it was like some question that she had asked was similar to that, and I was like, okay. And then also in Life of the Party in my program, there's like a practical exercise that we do that's called the like in my era post, where you like have to claim like what era you're stepping into or whatever. And so it's just so funny because I was like thinking about posting this week. I plan on putting something out there about that, just like in reference to this conversation. So I have been thinking about it a lot. And the answer that I will give to you, that I will also be putting publicly, so you'll get more context, I suppose. But self-exposure, like that's how I feel. Like I'm in my self-exposure era. Like I feel like I am in the era of just like letting like being very intentional about the information that I share, with the intention of like I want it all out on the table. Like I want people to know me. Like I really want to like expose myself in that sense, like expose my truth, my secrets, like my past, like whatever that is. Like I don't want to feel like I'm hiding behind anything, or like I'm trying to like bury things beneath things that maybe previously would have brought me shame or would have made me feel like strange to talk about or afraid to talk about. And like for me to feel like I'm in control of that, so for me to be the one who's actually like putting that out into the world on purpose. And I do think that like underlying it's this idea that I'm really in this season of striving for visibility, striving for being seen and recognized on like bigger on a bigger scale, not necessarily like in a different way, but just like more people, more eyes, more access. And because of that, I also know like what comes with that, right? It comes scrutiny, it comes with like people, finding stuff out, and I kind of want to just like be responsible for that myself so that I don't have to fear it. So that's just like something that I've really been working on, and it feels very alive.
I love that so much. And I feel like that you have been doing that more and more. And I also feel like it's the season we're in. I'm talking to a lot of people recently. Maybe it's Leo season, maybe it's just like more of a bigger energy, but I feel like there are a lot of people who are having very confronting conversations about who they are and just like putting themselves on the line, whether that's in a very visible way or just like with one-on-one relationship dynamics. And I think that allowing more of ourselves to be seen in whatever capacity feels right for us is something the world is asking of us right now. And I love this for you, and I can't wait to see how, like, the trajectory of this for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I do think it is very much the season we're in. I think you're right. It's like people just really want to know. They just want to know like what the fuck's going on. Like they just want to know like who are you? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What's your deal? What's your story? And that is just like it is how we connect. It is what we desire. But then I also think that on like that sort of secondary layer, I also think people are starting to realize that it's something that they also just want. Like they want to be seen in that way. It's not just that people want to know more about each other. It's that like they themselves want to be known and they want to be seen. And I do feel like we live in a really interesting moment within society where like we have so much access to each other through the internet, obviously. And I feel like there's almost been like a bit of a pivot where people are actually like, wait, this isn't Like, I mean, there's a lot of really bad shit, horrible shit, of course. But then on the kind of side of it, it's almost like people are like, well, wait, like I have the opportunity to be like my most truthful, my most honest, and have a lot of people be seen and to feel seen and be impacted by that. I'm just gonna like do that. Like it all of a sudden feels appealing. Whereas I feel like a couple of years ago it was very much like be private, like, move in silence, like hold your boundaries. And I have nothing against that either. But I do feel like this desire or this like almost like we're suddenly awake to the fact that like, wait, we could be showing up in this way that could be really impactful to people and could feel really good for me. Why am I not using it? Let me learn how. And I'm feeling like I'm noticing a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this brings us back to part of what we were talking about before of how, like, as long as we are showing up intentionally and with integrity, it can bring us closer together online if we just allow ourselves to be fully seen and if we just put more of ourselves out there. And that's how social media can be connective.
Yes, totally, totally. And it's looking at it through that lens. It's like you and I wouldn't have met. We wouldn't be having this conversation. Like there's so much positive, and it's interesting where kind of in that same way where like we always get to choose like what part of the story we identify with, right? Like we get to choose like whether we identify with like the desire and the journey or if we identify with like not reaching the goal and failing, right? And in the same way with social media, it's like we can feel like, wow, I'm so annoyed that I have to be on my phone, or we can be like, wow, how cool that I have like literally I wouldn't have my best adult friends, I wouldn't have a single one of them if the internet didn't exist. And I will never not be grateful for that. I always look for like what is the thing that this gave me and try to center that instead of what it takes away.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I mean, and we've talked about this a lot, but so much can shift when you just like switch one thing in your mind. And I will say that I really think of you as a connector. Like all the people who I have truly made like meaningful connections with online, I think you've introduced me to all of them.
I love
And
it.
yeah, and just the fact that your community is so live and connective just speaks to the energy that you show up with. So I think you're the best. I really do. Okay, okay. Let me go into the last question. Living intuitively wild means connecting to your true self and living dedicated to who you are at your core, no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
Ooh, that just gave me goosebumps. I love it. It's actually funny because I was thinking about your name because Frank was like, "Oh, like intuitively wild." Like he said he just said it out loud, and I don't often hear it said out loud in my own household. And I was like, "Yeah, like it's Rachel." And so I was just thinking about the name and I was thinking about the language of it all. And I think it's really interesting where I feel like for me, it is very much a practice of not judging the way I want to move that day. And I think what's interesting with that is like I don't necessarily think like wild comes very natural to me. I'm like you could define me as wild at pretty much any stage in my life. But what doesn't come as natural to me sometimes is being quiet or being slow or being reflective or having a bit of perhaps foresight, like not having so much impulsivity, not being so reactive in those ways that like can serve me really well, but also not always. And so I think when I think about being intuitively wild, it's almost like to intuit what I need and to not be in opposition of it, even if it's what I don't expect. So it might be something that I look at and think like, oh, that's a little bit out of my nature, or it challenges or it stretches me in some way. And I'm not going to deny that. I'm just going to trust it and I'm going to move with it. I'm going to go with it. And like, we'll see what happens.
Mm, yeah, I love that so much. And I think that that really speaks to just being present with ourselves and accepting ourselves as we are in this present moment versus like, well, what we were talking about before, like this is what I'm supposed to do, or this is who I told myself to be. And so this is what I do. And just like really allowing what's alive in us right now to be what it is.
I love that.
I love that so much, Xanthe. Thank you for being here. Share with everyone where they can find you, anything else on your mind.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm like sad it's over. I feel like it went by so fast. But you can find me at Xanthe.Appleyard on Instagram. That's definitely where I'm most active. Whatever I'm launching or promoting in the moment in terms of ways you can work with me, you will find it all there. It's always going to be the thing that's linked to my bio. Whenever you listen to this, you can tap in. And if you listen to this, and regardless of if you are interested in working with me or if you just want to say hi, just send me a DM. Like I literally answer every message. I'd love to get a DM. Let me know you listened to the episode. It'd be so cool to connect.
Yay. Thank you again for being here. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.